Hello, welcome to the Health In Show, an affiliate program of Homeopathy World Community. You've come to the right place to tune in and participate with your comments and questions. Love is the greatest healer of all. But sometimes, in order to change our emotions, we must take action in other spheres of our lives. We speak with experts in alternative and complementary health fields and hope you will benefit in some small or great way. Remember, you are wherever your thoughts are. Make sure your thoughts are where you want to be.
Welcome to the Health In Show, a subsidiary of Homeopathy World Community. We're so delighted to have you join us today from wherever you are, at whatever time it is. We're just so happy to be together. So please know that anytime during the show, you can write us comments, ask questions. You can call into the show. We'd love to have you. Put your name under the video and you can participate in our chat, and we monitor that. Or you can come in on Skype, and that would be computers, then the number 2K voice. So you'll come in on voice, not video, so don't worry about that. Or you can call us at 919-518-9773 during the show. And feel free, because it really makes it so interesting when we hear from you, our audience, our friends, our colleagues. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas, your experience, your history on whatever it is that we're talking about. So here we are. We want to thank Amnon, our producer, always in the background. Hi, Amnon. Thanks so much for everything.
Sure. Have a good show.
Thank you. And then there's Dr. Deepak and Uta. Deepak, how are you today?
I'm good, Marlene.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And you are in where? Tell everybody where you are.
I'm from India, Delhi.
India, Delhi. And then there's Miss Uta.
Hello there. How are you today, everyone? I'm glad to be here again on this show, and we're going to have an exciting guest today who is a little bit late, so we're still waiting on him. We're going to talk with Roland Bal. Now, he's someone who does a lot of trauma work and PTSD, and we are waiting to talk with him about disassociation and how survival creates personality. He's not here yet, but we're in good spirits that he will join us shortly. And I'm in Portugal where the sun is shiny and the weather is absolutely stunning with not a cloud in the sky, pure blue. Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm looking at a lot of sun and blue too. So it must be a sunny day. I don't know. It sounds good. So trauma, that's a big deal. It's a buzzword. It's behind a lot of what's going on around. So Deepak, I know before the show we were talking and you were expressing some things. So would you be willing to just kind of start?
Yes. Thank you, Marlene, and thank you, Uta, for this wonderful session of PTSD. So the term is trauma. This is really a big term. The trauma, that does not only mean that you hurt by the gun injury, you hurt by the accident, or you hurt by the falling on the floor. This is not only to the injuries, physical injury only. This will be a mental injury also. So what the post-traumatic stress disorders are mostly a mental health conditions. The reaction of the fright or the fight, the response is changed or damaged. And the trauma can also be from the event like combat exposure, the childhood neglection, the terrorist attack, the post-COVID effects also. So everything can be traumatic by the mental levels, but especially when we are talking about the PTSD, we are talking about the mental trauma. We are not talking about the physical trauma only. So here in this era, in last 2 years, we are seeing most of the cases of COVID and the fear of the COVID. Even we are having the patient in India, and I think all over the world also, that maximum person are going into the fear. Many persons are listening the first term, the lockdown, come up with the first term quarantine. They never heard about the quarantine word and the lockdown word. So in this condition, maximum are coming with this fright or the fear position. So what I feel the post-traumatic stress disorder, that it will hurt your mind and then give you a physical symptoms like many come up with the palpitations, many come up with the hyperacidity, many come up with the diarrhea, many come up with the loose motions or the irritable bowel syndrome, or many come up with the migraines. So, PTSD is caused a physical symptom, but this is really a mental condition. So, we need to understand where is the patient on the first floor, on the second floor, or on the fourth floor. So, whenever the patient is coming with us, for the migraine. We are talking just an example that if anyone is coming with the migraine, so we need to take a history of that person, that why it has the migraine. So if the patient is not having any family history, then we should having any mental trauma. Like in a case that recently one of my patient came with the left-sided migraine, already a diagnosed case from a neurologist, and come up with a many medication. And I heard about the stories. And in 2022, when the lockdown started, actually he was not in the uh, own city; he was out of his station. But the lockdown is the phase where he's stuck in a next station, and he cannot travel to their home. And it was a 14 to 15 day he requesting everyone, every policeman, every authorities, he calling to the customer cares, he write up emails to the government, but nobody is listening, nobody having no idea that how he will gone from this situation. So after 1 month of this, he's developing some time of headache, not migraine from my side, but I listen him very properly, that nobody can listen him. So when I choose the listening and console her that the situation is for everyone, not for only for you. You are not only the person who is stuck in that lockdown. There are many persons, and by this counseling also, I'm not giving any medication. And by this counseling also, he's feeling very relieved. And I called after a week, and he's perfectly well without any medication.
Mhm.
So it was the mental trauma that is called the post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic disorder does not mean only the mental symptoms. It may be come up with a migraine. It may be come up with the hyperacidity. It may be come up with the gastric symptoms. I already told that. And also we have many cases in this last 2 years. We have many cases. Still, we are having many issues because we are living in the negative words. We are not going to talk positively. We are not going to give a good ideas. We are spreading the bad news. I also give a lecture on the infodemic, that is more than dangerous to the from the pandemic. Infodemic means the exchange of the wrong materials or the wrong news to the worldwide. Like I write a message on the Telegram, a negative word, and this is spreading to the thousands of people in just a second.
Mhm.
So infodemic is more dangerous than the pandemic. So this is about the PTSD. I also request you, Ota and Martin,
Mhm.
what you are facing any kind like of this case. I can explain the PTSD, but I am waiting if the speaker is coming. Otherwise, we will have enough data to complete the PTSD.
Otherwise, we have Deepak share his wonderful wisdom and expertise with us, which we're equally as happy about to hear from because it's so very valuable. And yes, I found that listening is a very, very big factor. And during the COVID times, there's been a lot of separation because we've had people fall into into groups, so to speak. There's people that say, oh my God, COVID. And there's other people that say, oh, is it really that bad? And there's a lot of separation. That is, people have stopped communicating. People have stopped listening, most of all, which is, I'm sure Marilyn can tell us a little bit about, because listening is so very important. And that explains very well that already when you listened to your patient, that already made a real impact on him, because people don't communicate during this time. And as you very well said, the information exchange that we've had during all this time, and it's so diverse and there's so much, and everybody has to say something about it, and everybody is an expert in the field, even if they are not. And there's too much going on and people are overwhelmed. So PTSD is a traumatic experience alone out of the situation, but these stressors trigger it on a daily basis when we open newspapers, when we listen to the television, when we go onto social media. So this, I think, is a very important factor that you've mentioned, that already this information that comes in on us is just simply too much for a lot of people, and they develop as a cause of this post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, Marilyn, tell us something about listening.
Well, I will, and I love us talking about this. This is probably one of the most, if not the most important subject, because it underlies so many things. Because yes, we have all the COVID stuff, and the issue is we already had trauma before that. I mean, people talk about just going through the birth canal is traumatic. I mean, family dynamics are traumatic. School for kids are traumatic. Just there's so many things that are already traumatic that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that most of us already are dealing with some form of PTSD anyway. And then you take all of that and you add all this other trauma of COVID, of sick, of not sick, of communicating, not communicating, wars. I mean, food, nutrition, all of these things have a bearing on our state of mind and our state of heart. And so this is really important to even acknowledge that we're all dealing with this, and how important it is for us all to acknowledge something about it so that we can deal with it, because it's deep rooted in our being. And so it's almost like it's a part of everyday life. Just as changes and stresses, trauma is a part of everyday life. And it's pervasive. So it's not a condition that you can say, my arm hurts, or my this hurts, or my that hurts, or I'm experiencing, because sometimes you don't know what the trauma is causing, because it causes everything. It can be the culprit in everything. And so, first of all, listening to our bodies, listening to ourselves is very important, because if you don't listen first to yourself, how are you going to explain or understand this in order to share with somebody else? And so I guess one of the questions I would have is, trauma can be can it be cured? Can it be okay? Yeah,
Definitely.
Deepak, take it away.
So that we need to understand what the actually symptoms of PTSD, and how you recognize that you are in the PTSD, or your friend is in PTSD. The main symptom in this is the avoidance or the ignorance to the society. Like, I am feeling that I am alone, I am not talking to anyone, I am just feeling good in my single room. So this is the first symptom when we are facing. The second is the negative changes in the thinking, that I cannot do this and think, and everything is negative. So negativity is the second symptom. And the another thing is the changes in the emotional reactions, like that. If someone is died, he's or he or she is talking like that, oh, there is nothing like that, everyone is going to die on a single day, or that they, oh, really shocking. So there is a changes in the reaction when we are going to the normal reaction to the things, but the opposite reactions are there. Like if a party is having the laughing everyone, then he is feeling that no, this is not a matter of laughing, I'm going to somewhere where I am feeling alone, is it good. So these kind of symptom are the basic symptom. Other than these are the symptoms from the mental state. Other symptoms are hyperacidity, the cold without any pathology. Means your X-ray is normal, your ultrasound is normal, your endoscopy is normal, nothing found in the pathology, but there is a symptom. Like many of the patient is complaining that, doctor, I am having burning sensation in my mid chest. I completed my endoscopy, I completed my LFT is normal, my ultrasound is normal, but there is burning in my chest. So what everyone is saying, oh, you have something in your mind, so that you have the burning in chest. So what is in their mind? That is the main motto of every physician or of every friend. So he's explaining, means in natural theory is saying, if someone is having in throat irritation without any pathology, that means that you want to expel something but cannot. So many things are there. So first we need to understand the psychological pattern of this disease. Is the physical state or the mental state is mixing, or they are separate? Many symptoms, like if I am telling that there is the ulcer in the stomach, then hyperacidity is the common factor. But nothing in the stomach, hyperacidity is there, so it means that is something different. So what we are talking, because I am a homeopath, so we are connecting to the word with these symptoms, that the today's medical science is only considering the physical symptom. Oh, that you are having facility, so we are doing the endoscopy. I think speaker Sir Mal is there.
Hi there.
Yes, hello. He's arrived.
I
Hello,
have,
Roland.
yeah. I'll tell you, I have a window open here with that shows the Eastern Standard Time, and it shows to me that it's still 40 minutes to 10. So we got the timing wrong in one way or the other.
Oh, well, we're glad you're here anyway.
Yeah,
So,
sorry for that.
welcome.
I mean, I don't know how we mixed that up, but anyway, I'm here.
No worries. We had a great replacement. Dr. Deepak was so kind to share his experiences on PTSD.
Hi,
and
Dr.
especially
Deepak.
the post COVID trauma that we're seeing nowadays.
Big one, yeah.
Yes. So, Roland, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? I've done a short introduction, but way too short. I can't sum it up all. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay. Where shall I start? I mean, from a professional point of view, I started with body work a long time ago when I was in my early 20s. I studied craniosacral therapy and visceral manipulation, which are osteopathic approaches. And then I had private practices in Holland and Luxembourg, and later on also in Spain. And over the years, I saw that a lot of these tensions and pains that, you know, when you kind of work with your hands and feel different bodies, that they're often emotionally related. So you might solve a physical issue, but then just a few weeks later, it pops up in a different place. So I started to dig deeper and get more interested into trauma and where emotion is held in the body. And from there, I developed my approach. So working through trauma, kind of taking on board a cognitive approach. So having a good framework of what's happening, the various steps of dissociation. And then also with that background I have in kind of working with the body, taking on that somatic approach as well, because the emotion is held in the body. And so, over the years, I've developed a kind of system. I call it the process of dissociation, to work through these layers of dissociation and kind of come back to reintegration and embodiment. And I mean, I got really interested in the beginning in PTSD, but then a lot of people who were kind of interested in what I wrote, they were dealing with complex trauma. So I kind of dug deeper into that. Complex trauma, childhood trauma, and yeah, I've become a bit of a specialist in that area over the years. So that's in kind of in short, to encapsulate a little bit what I do and where I come from.
Perfect. We wanted to talk today about disassociation and how survival creates personality. Let's just define dissociation, being the mental process of disconnecting from one's thoughts and feelings and memories and the sense of identity. So tell us a bit about the sufferer. Who is the sufferer of disassociation?
Right. I mean, I think there's so many levels to it. You can have kind of simple dissociation when you're stressed, you don't want to be with your stress, and you kind of you go to your mobile phone, whatever, right? That's also a form of disconnection or dissociation. And then if an incident or a period that is drawn out is more intense, then those dissociation patterns are becoming more rigid and more intense. And so what I've kind of categorized, there are a few layers that we go through when we dissociate. So when we talk about trauma, either be it incidental or a prolonged period of time, there's always a core emotion that overwhelms you, anger, fear, sadness. And when you can't hold that, you dissociate in an emotion that's easier for you to stay with. Again, that might be expressed as anger, fear, or sadness. And you start to express that coping emotion. And that coping emotion then moves into thought. So you kind of come from that embodiment, you move upward into the head and even further outward. And from that coping emotion, often that gets tied up with excessive thoughts of guilt, blame, shame, self-reproach, self-righteousness, guilt, self-defeat, etc., etc. And those thoughts, they reinforce those emotions that you're held in the body, but it's a little bit removed from the body. And you kind of go between excessive thoughts and then back in the body, back and forth. And then there's another layer that comes on board as well, which is some form of addiction. There might be behavioral addiction, or there might be substance addiction, depending on kind of your character and also what you kind of adapted to as your way of coping. And then from there on, the last dissociation stage, what I see is then the disconnection or the freeze response or the going numb, which is kind of the most severe dissociated state. And very often you see that you pendulate between those two states. So you're disconnected, numb, frozen, and then suddenly you get triggered and you go back into the body and you go into complete overwhelm. And that seems to be a bit the kind of pattern where a trauma survivor or sufferer deals with, that constant back and forth between being hypersensitive, fully overwhelmed, and then back again into a shutdown response.
So what's your approach to combating disassociation?
Basically it's reversing dissociation. So you have to start from where you are. You can't start from where you're not. And so you can't say yourself with thought, like, oh, I shouldn't be like this. I have to overcome this. I mean, you probably try because that's a natural instinct, right? You don't want to stay with what's painful and uncomfortable. But you have to start from where you are. So whatever presents itself in the moment, that's your starting point. So when I work with people one-on-one, with clients, you can pick up on the things that are kind of repeating for them. So if they're going into guilt or into shame, you can start there and kind of say, okay, can you feel into that? Can you stay with that, but without further giving it energy to it by thinking about it like, oh, I'm a bad person. If only I could have been, if I do these things different, or if I would have done things different, but just to stay with the feeling. And then very often you can go from the excessive thought, you can kind of connect with the underlying emotion. So you kind of take them step by step through those different layers of dissociation, back again into that reconnection. Now it's easy to talk about it, of course, because the real process is like, it's very delicate. So you have to really go back and forth and build in breaks and help to regulate and contain that emotional energy. And then you kind of often find that there's one story or two storylines that are dominant and that people are reenacting and projecting into their present life. So there's that kind of history that repeats itself. So bit by bit, you want to kind of link the past with the present, the symptoms that they have now, maybe physical, but also psychological, and then how that relates back to their past. And then it's kind of bit by bit, kind of putting the puzzles back together.
Marilyn?
Well, I'm not a homeopath. I'm a life business coach, but I'm doing a lot of work in the substance use opioid arena. And I have been facilitating educational summits and things for the general public to help educate the public on everything that has to do with addiction and whatever. And substance use, I mean, I know about the trauma that, I mean, you just like woke me up when even more so when you said that, because that is a big deal. And so many of the individuals that I talk with who have lived experience have lived trauma. Whether it's a child who's lived with a family member or whatever, and the work you're doing, I thank you, because it's you got to break it down. So the success of working with someone who has been dealing with substance use for a long time. I mean, how do you do that? How do you get to, how do you work? I mean, I know you said you break it down pieces, but can you talk some about that? Because there's so much of that we're facing.
I mean, I never focus on addiction itself only. And I think that's the main thing, because sometimes when you focus on something, it starts to grow out of proportion, right? So it's very delicate. And like I said, I see addiction as one layer of dissociation. And so when you actually start to address the trauma, you start to take away the conflict that people create around addiction, because there's so much self-reproach that is often compounding the addiction, and that kind of loops on itself, right? So there's that fighting with addiction, and that creates that loop with feeding the addiction by fighting with it. And so the moment you start to address the trauma and you tell people that the addiction is put in place as a way of helping you, as a way of surviving, it's a coping mechanism, that kind of turns around the perspective. Rather than trying to overcome it and fighting with it, you start to look at the underlying causes, which obviously is trauma. And then you have to kind of start to unravel what's the energy and the emotion that is the trauma that is still in the system. And you'll see then that as you start to digest and address the trauma, also the impulse to move your energy into addiction starts to lessen. Not because you're addressing the addiction, but you're addressing the underlying causes of addiction.
So I'm going to reach out to you at another time and possibly have you, if you're interested, speak at something else, because what you're saying is so important that I would love to share it even more.
Sure,
so
sounds good.
Yeah, because you're not focusing on the addiction, but like the shame, those emotions. I mean, when you can get to them, are holding the addiction up. So breaking through that is exactly what's necessary. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing and all of that. Yeah, and then Pretty is here too, so we're a full team today. But I'm going to just listen now because I want to hear everything you have to say.
Hi, Roland, and hi, everyone. And
hi, Pretty.
Hi. What I wanted to maybe discuss and seek your opinion on, a lot of our listeners are homeopaths and healers, and any advice that you might want to give to people like us who might have patients and clients who have had trauma? What is your advice to healers and practitioners? Because it ends, right? I mean, even for your own self, to kind of is any piece of advice that you might have for us.
That's a very open and difficult question, right? So where to start? I mean, one thing comes to mind what Peter Levine said. He kind of says, shut up and listen. So that's one, that's one advice, like not giving too many suggestions. I think what can be damaging is when you start to give suggestions out of goodwill, out of good intentions. But sometimes advice and suggestions is not what people need. They need someone to listen to them. That's one thing. And I'm sure that once you have some experience, you'll start to listen more and kind of give less suggestions. I think the other thing is, I don't know how much time you have for sessions and how much you want to enter into the emotional part of working with patients, right? If you do homeopathy. So that's, I think, something very personal to consider. So then again, it kind of, can you listen by asking the right questions? So if you really want to go into the emotional part, ask the right questions, but also be prepared that you have some emotion that might come up. And then can you hold the space for those emotions and contain it? And with containment, I mean, you want to kind of navigate the extremes. So you want to be careful that people don't go into a dissociation response where the energy goes back out into the head and they kind of go numb and they freeze, or they kind of get blocked, or they get too overwhelmed and too much emotion starts to flow out. And as a practitioner, both of these responses can kind of make you feel at a loss, like, okay, what do I do now, right? So you got to navigate those extremes of not allowing too much emotion to come out. And then also when the dissociation comes on, to kind of keep talking to them, like, okay, just expressing sometimes what you see. I can see you got a bit overwhelmed and you're kind of disconnecting and coming back to the head. Just that acknowledgement sometimes is already enough. Like, oh, somebody understands me and feels what I'm going through. And that helps them to bring back. I mean, the way I work with people individually is, I mean, going into that emotional territory, usually I talk with them a bit, what I call, we talk about what they're dealing with, and then we talk in what they're dealing with. So talking about is from the third person, almost as if they're telling their story. And then I ask them usually to close their eyes and describe what they feel on a more somatic emotional level. And then you start to touch really on the feelings. So you're talking into what's happening for them. And that talking into, if they're provided there's enough containment, helps them to actually process what they're feeling. It's that contact point between awareness and the emotion that's still in the body that transforms the emotion and makes that emotion move into the awareness. And so the emotion goes down and the awareness comes up. And it's often about non-doing and not so much about you doing something and applying a technique. No, it's more about you holding space and listening. And then through that listening, you help them people to digest or transform the emotion into awareness. And I'm very adamant about it. It's not about release. We often think, or at least 10, 20 years ago, that it's all about cathartic releases and that that will help people to move forward. But it's actually more about integration, and it's that process from emotion flowing into awareness. And that brings about the digestion of emotion and transformation of that emotion that actually helps you to become more resilient and stronger. Because the release, you can release emotion, you can punch it out, you can scream, you can sometimes cry it out, but then, which has a role. I'm not saying it's not, there's something bad about it. It's just that it can build up again as well if there's not enough understanding.
I think we lost him for a second, right?
Yeah, I think we lost him there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that he's mentioning listening and the person-centeredness, because that's what we are as homeopaths all about. Our practice, our classical practice, is all about holding the space for our patients. What I find more interesting is that he said not allowing too much of this emotion to come out. I think that's something we would maybe struggle more as homeopaths than not.
Yeah, and I think, and I think it's important to understand that nobody can tell somebody this is something people have to find themselves, because many of these people did not have the emotion other than that emotion that they're having now, the fear. They didn't experience a emotion they can even go back to. They had not experienced a joy or a gratitude or an appreciation or peace, so they don't even have that. So it's got to be it's like mourning and grief. You can't tell somebody how to mourn and grieve. Same thing with this. You just have to hold that space.
Yes, Malin, this is true. PTSD is not a small term. This is a very huge term. Many of us are living in this world having the PTSD in many ways. So I think Ronald sir is here. So Ronald, what we are talking about the PTSD, that many of the person is not knowing that they are having the PTSD. So we are having the many people, those are not doctors or not physicians here. So what are the common symptoms or what are the common things in the person that are that he can or she can recognize that I have PTSD?
Questions for me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hypersensitivity, hypervigilance, difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite, chronic pains, bowel disorders, ongoing bowel disorders, migraines, like everything that's ongoing for a long time. And then also the kind of frozen shutdown response, or that going in between the frozen shutdown response and being anxious, hypervigilant. Those are very clear symptoms of PTSD.
So what do you say do sufferers need the most when they come and see you? What is it? Is it the holding of the space? Is it the listening? Is it the exploring of these triggers or of these traumatic moments? What is it that you have found in your experience that sufferers actually are helped by the most?
Right. I think the people I see, they've tried many things, so they're very frustrated with the regular healthcare system that's there and the resources. So they kind of find me, and it's an aha moment. Like, okay, somebody is not just addressing one symptom, but looking at all the various layers of dissociation and the symptoms that go with it. And like I said, those excessive thoughts of guilt, blame, shame, self-reproach, self-righteousness, self-defeat, etc., etc. And then the different addictions, and then the kind of coping emotions like high anxiety disorder, or and dealing with excessive anger. So just putting it together, and then once they read some of my things, when I talk extensively about the fight, flight, and freeze, and also the pleasing responses, and yeah, just the way how the mind functions and dissociate, I think that kind of makes people reach out to me and say, okay, well, you seem to get what I'm experiencing on a day-to-day basis.
Do you have any story and I, something that, about maybe a client, patient? What do you call your clients, patients? What do you call them?
Clients, people.
Do you have any story of a client who, started with you, and I mean, without obviously saying any names, but it's something that you can share specifically, and how long it took? Not that that's a gauge, but it's something. And where they ended up. Yeah.
I can tell you one story. I mean, I'm picking out a very successful story, right? So someone who found
that gives us good possibilities, right?
Yeah, yeah. So someone in his mid-20s, he found my resources. He asked me if he could get a discount because he was unemployed. And so I gave him a little discount to kind of get the trauma care meditations that I have as a package to work through dissociation. So he started working with that and keep me updated of what was happening to him. He managed to get a job as he was listening through those meditations, working through his dissociation. And he was, at the moment, the first time he reached out to me, he was dealing with suicidal thoughts and not wanting to go on. Also, he had to take care of his family coming from the East. he had to take care of his family because his father wasn't well. His mother also wasn't well. So he's kind of the caretaker of the family. So he got a job, and then he managed actually to move to Europe after some time. So he worked through his want for not wanting to live, suicidal, coming from sexual abuse himself, and then through that package kind of started to regain some boundaries and healthy containment and starting to digest some of his emotion. And now he managed to get a residency in Europe, having a full-time job and still working on his recovery, but there's just been a lot of progress that he's made in, what is it, probably the last 5 years or so. And I still see him from time to time just to check in with him. So not all hope is lost. There is hope. But I also always want to give healthy expectations to people that it is a long and arduous road. It needs a lot of work. It needs persistence and patience. And don't believe a magic pill or promises that people might make, especially when you're dealing with childhood trauma and complex trauma. And there are even certain patterns that will always persist. What might change is that you have more resilience to deal with patterns. So if beforehand you were triggered and you were stuck in an activation for months on end, now it might be a week or it might be a few days. And so it might not be gone, but the way you deal with them has changed dramatically. And that is already a world of a change.
Would you like to just outline in a few words what the conventional approach to disassociation is? So
medication, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Also, you have to consider that the regular healthcare system, they just don't have the time and resources very often to support the people. So a regular doctor just have 5 to 10 minutes to see a patient. So it's impossible to actually hold the space and go into an emotion. Mm-hmm. And then I would say that many of the models that are used in psychology are very outdated. They're not up to speed with the current times and the current mindset.
And the least of them are actually holistic.
Yeah. So it's not that there's not goodwill for many of the practitioners. It's just that there's a part of it is maybe not like education hasn't been innovated sufficiently.
I think it's a lot of what you just said, and it's also the psychological education hasn't been assimilated. A lot of people end up going to their medical doctor because they have a pain here or they have a this there to get treated for that, not for the underlying trauma. And so, and the flow and the energy part. You keep talking about the energy, the emotional energy, this energy, and that is so important to acknowledge. That it's not an etched in stone thing. I mean, where is the trauma sitting? I mean, in what part of your body, in what vein, in what, in what bone?
Exactly.
Is it a I mean, where is the trauma from? I mean, I'm aware that you can get trauma just in a glance. Somebody could look funny. A kid could be somewhere, somebody gets into a kid's space. I mean, I have seen people talk about this when they finally get to it, that there was somebody in their childhood that got into their personal space and scared them. And that is trauma that they have carried through their lives. And how are you going to even remember some of that stuff? So this is like really important to consider all of these things that occur. So.
How long are your consultations? How long do you actually sit in a single consultation with your patients?
It's probably around 50 to 60 minutes a session.
And by what frequency do you generally see patients? Let's say in a month.
I see people for usually 5-session package. So the first 3-4 times I see them, I want to see them once a week. Once they're a bit more stabilized, I might change that to once every 2 weeks. Yeah, I don't see many people anymore because the website and the project has kind of grown quite a bit. So yeah, I have so many things to juggle. So I just see very limited amount of people. And I'm about to take a break again from counseling. So it's kind of on and off. Sometimes I have a period, I take some people in again. And then, yeah. Because I have a few courses also. Maybe you've seen the website that I kind of have. There's exactly what Marilyn just said, that it's important to see where the emotions held in the body, because the trauma does go in specific places, kind of the weak places. And in one of my products, the trauma care meditations, I go through this process of dissociation and address the different body systems and how that relate to the different emotions.
So tell us something about your courses then.
So that one, the trauma care audio guided meditations, that's mainly focused on working with dissociation and reconnecting through using the body. I have a course on sleep and insomnia related to post-traumatic stress, because it's a symptom that very often comes up, and I address what might be the patterns that prevent you from sleeping. Again, that kind of freeze response, and then also the hypersensitivity, hyperactivity, burnout responses, and what you might do to kind of address sleep by addressing the post-traumatic stress. And then the last course I'm still finishing up is healing from narcissistic abuse, which is a big one. So I go into 2 character types, which is the fight-anger response and the please-appeaser, or the highly empathic person, and how they get attracted to each other. And so one person, if he or she goes through trauma, might as a way of surviving, channel their energy into a fight response. So they feel the need to dominate, to subjugate, to be in control. And they get their sense of validation through that response based on trauma, right? And then the opposite response is somebody who defaults to a pleasing response. And that person might get his or her validation by subjugating him or herself to others to get that sense of validation and acceptance. And these character types, they kind of gravitate to each other, and then they form that trauma bond or narcissistic bond. And so in this course, I've outlined those 2 character patterns, the character types, and really go into, you know, how they manifest, where it might come from, what it relates to. And then especially focused on the please-appeaser, because the one who's in a fight-anger response very often has to deal with self-righteousness and fault-finding, so that person won't seek help that easily, right? And so we focused a bit more the healing part on the one who has a please-appeasing personality type, and to kind of go through the steps, what he or she might do to kind of extract him or herself from an abusive situation, and start to set boundaries and work on their healing process.
Very interesting. Preeti?
So I was really touched by these 2 words that you used. One was awareness and one was integration. And these seem like really important words in, you know, healing these individuals. But they also have a very broad understanding, right? So awareness, what exactly do you mean? And when you say integration, what do you mean? If you can just let us know. What do you really mean with awareness and integration?
You're asking the easy questions, aren't you?
Oh!
Yeah, that was sarcasm. What is awareness and what is integration? I mean, I think it's a whole discussion on its own, right? Because it's kind of, you're delving into the, what's the essence of the self and metaphysical questions. So, I mean, to me, is awareness is being able to stay with what is without wanting to change what is. And so you're taking away the element of psychological time, which is you want to be somewhere else from where you're not. And so when you're angry, or when you're sad, or when you're overwhelmed with anxiety, very often and very quickly, the mind kicks in and wants to go to an opposite. It wants to not be angry, not be sad, and not be anxious because it's not pleasant. And within that, you create psychological time between what is, you're angry, you're upset, you're anxious, you're sad, and the place you want to be, which is somewhere placed in the future, or you go back to the past or what happened to you, right? So within that lives psychological time between what is and where you want to be, which is dissociation, which is the continuation of trauma. And so what is awareness is closing that gap of dissociation or psychological time, which is not going with the movement of wanting to be somewhere else from where you're not. And I think the moment you do that, and I use the body, I use the soma to kind of reconnect with that place where the emotion is held. The moment there's connection, which is observation between what you feel in the body and where the emotion is held, that touching point in itself is awareness, where the emotion flows into presence, intelligence, awareness, whatever word you want to give to it. And it's that moment when that person doesn't, again, dissociate into a freeze response or gets too overwhelmed by the emotion. And that's a process, right? You go back and forth. But that touching point for me is awareness, is integration or awareness. Integration happens as there's that touching point of awareness. The thing is that awareness is not something that is of our thoughts, of our mind. It's like something you invite into the space and then it does its work, right? So it's not me.
It's not intellectual. It's
exactly.
more of, yeah.
Right. And it's not something you can own or something that's mine or yours. It's something that as you guide a person or facilitate their process, you close that gap of dissociation of psychological time. And that touching point of awareness can happen. And it doesn't matter what kind of words you want to give to it. If you're religious, you'll give some more religious connotation to it. If you're not, you might give a word like awareness, which is more universal, which I like to use to it. That's as best as I can describe kind of in my own words.
Yeah, it's beautiful and it's very helpful. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So, here is a question on our chat. Glenn is asking, who looks after your patient when you take a break?
Right. I try to, like for the moment, for example, I'm going to stop in end of June for a few months, July, August, September. I make sure that 1 or 2 months before I don't take in any new patients anymore. So I can at least do 5 to 10 sessions with the people I work with, and not to leave them open as we kind of open up some of their processes. So, and then towards the end of June, for example, I'll warn them sufficiently in advance so they're prepared. They're not in a shock when I suddenly say I'm not available. And then they have my resources as well to fall back on. So they still have my voice in one way or the other.
So, and here is one question from my side. When you stuck in a case like that, we are not getting the 100% results in every case. So you have any difficulty, then where you refer to the any consultant or any medical doctor, where you refer?
That's a difficult one. I mean, I'm quite persistent myself, so I really try to kind of hang in there and see what opens up and just kind of try different angles. I think the most difficult cases I've had are people who are really, they believe they're self-defeat with 100%. And so it's very difficult to get people out of that pattern. And then other very difficult cases I worked with is people who have, from very early life, they haven't had any support or they weren't wanted. So with overt abuse, it's easy to work with because people still have a sense of self and identity, even if it's a negative image. But if they don't have anything, they don't have a sense of self because they've been severely neglected from very early life onwards. That's very difficult because it's almost like you have to build up an identity often as an adult, right? So it's very difficult to do that. So those are kind of my most difficult cases I worked with.
So,
This, I mean, this is just the beginning. I mean, there's so much to talk about with trauma. One of the things I was going to ask you, but we're almost out of time, was the trauma that comes with, let's say, reincarnation. Now that might be, or past lives, or, that we're carrying, or that, that might be, I don't know if you get into that, but I think it's persistent, and I think it's there as well. So that's something that I think we all, I would love to get into a little bit more, but Uta, what do you have?
Yeah, I thought the same. Transgenerational trauma was what I was interested in. But there's always a time to have Roland back if he's up for it. So maybe we postpone that for a different time.
Sure, sure. Day. I mean, I can give my quick thoughts on it. I'm often careful not to go too much into past lives, because people get into imagination and then they might take on too much on board, which is not real. So I don't deny it, I don't reject it, but I often bring it back to this life and tell people, like, whatever happened in previous lives will reenact itself again in this life. And everything that you address in this life that might have come from other lives, the patterns or the emotions will be the same. So if you address the emotion, this life or past lives, you're also addressing everything that happened that comes from way down, further down the line. And I often say that emotion doesn't live linearly, it lives spatially. So when you address trauma and when you address emotion, you bridge time. There's not a timeline that you kind of have to go through from point to point. But the moment you touch on emotion, people are very often transported back in time, and they touch upon what happened in that moment. They feel the exact emotions that are still alive and unresolved. And the moment you digest and work through that emotional residue, also the ideas of past life, they fall away, they become unimportant. They might see the connections between intergenerational, transgenerational, and what's happening in their lives. So I don't reject it, I don't disregard it, but I do want to keep it as real as possible, that it's tangible for the people to actually work through it.
Thank you very much. I think that sums it up for our show today. We've got 1 minute left. I'd just like to call the attention to the upcoming events at HWC. If you go visit our website at homeopathyworldcommunity.com on our front page, and on the calendar page, we have the upcoming events of each month, and of the coming months, we will have them shortly when we get into the new month. So this month we have on the 14th of May, a practitioner supervision talk, where we talk about adverse effects that we see in our practice of the vaccinations. And we talk on the 15th of May in a book club with Heinz Witwer, who talks about the homeopathic matrimonial remedies in practice, a book he's written about it. And we have an interesting webinar, an introduction into the treatment of cancer with homeopathy by our very own Hannah Shalom. So if you're interested in any of these, check out our website, homeopathyworldcommunity.com, and you can register from there. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Marilyn?
We just ditto everything you said, and I want to thank our guests so much for coming, because I know this made a difference for a lot of people, and that's what we're here for. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. We're going to have you again, I'm sure.
Sounds good.
If you will come. So anyway, Deepak, Priti, Uta, thank you.
Thank you.
Amnan, and we'll see you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Thank you, Ronald. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Deepak. Thanks, Priti.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.